Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Self Love Over Everything podcast, where we explore what it means to become the greatest versions of ourselves through the incredible act of self love. I'm your host, Snowy Lee, and I am so honored that you're here listening with me right now. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is the first official episode of the Self Love Over Everything podcast. If you don't know, there is a pilot where I do introduce myself a little bit more and I tell a little more of my inspiration for creating this podcast. But this is the first official episode and it's titled, Do You Even Love Yourself? So I know I'm coming in guns blazing and I'm excited to go ahead and just dive right in. But in this episode, I'd like to talk more about self love, what it is on a practical level, and why it's so important. I'd also like to share a little bit more about my personal story, just in the hopes that it may inspire you wherever you might be along your path. I also have a self love affirmation that I'll be sharing at the end of this episode, so do be sure to go ahead and listen all the way through. And again, I just want to say how honored and grateful I am that you're listening with me right now. And without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into the episode. In the pilot episode, I did mention a little bit about how fortunate I am to have had such a supportive family system, especially my mother being so adamant about speaking positive affirmations and things like that when I was younger. But I was never really taught how to love myself. And it wasn't until I hit a huge roadblock in my life that I realized I didn't love myself the way that I thought I did. And I think that this is the story of many women. I realized that I wasn't practicing self love in the way I thought I was. I thought that the way that I carried myself, the way I did things, my career path, all these things, etc., I thought all of these things were acts of self-love. And I guess on a superficial level, some of those things are. But I wasn't really practicing self-love in a way that was beneficial in the long haul. I was not practicing self love in a way that was consistent with where I wanted to go in life. And so I had to make a decision and I had to make a choice. And a big part of that was understanding and accepting the ways that I did not show love to myself by my very actions. I thought, I honestly thought, in the beginning of my journey that I was a confident woman with high self esteem. And I had to get real with myself and come to terms with the fact that the way I was carrying myself, the things I was allowing in my life, uh, the boundaries that I did not have, all of these things all reflected the fact to me that I was not a woman with high self esteem and self confidence. And so I had to be real with myself. I had to be honest and be transparent with about that. And it hurt. It hurt a lot. And underneath that hurt, once I accepted it, honestly, I also felt shame. I felt ashamed that that I had allowed myself to carry myself in that manner. And I felt silly and I felt naive to the ways that I was acting once I realized just how, instead of doing these things out of self love, I was doing them out of lack. I was doing them out of fear of lack, fear of losing, And instead of fear of losing myself, it was fear of losing other people, fear of losing my position, fear of losing my status, whatever the case was, those types of things. And so I had to, I just had to get real with myself. And I don't think that it was on purpose. I don't think that I was purposefully wearing a mask or a facade. I can honestly say that I just think that I was just allowing myself to live in my ego. If you know anything about the ego, you know that it will teach you everything you need to know. Um, but every lesson is definitely unwanted. So basically, life and my ego humbled me, and I came to terms with who I actually was and what I was actually doing in life. And this leads us to the quote I'd like to share for today's episode. This quote comes from Carl Gustav Jung, and he was a psychologist, one of the greatest of our time. And his life's work was studying the shadow. And I studied so much of his work in the process of writing my own book, The Shadow Workbook. This quote from Carl Jung is: the most terrifying thing to accept is oneself completely. Okay, so now that I've shared a little bit about how I realized I wasn't practicing self love, let me share how I began my own self love affair. I'd like to share a little bit about some of the steps I took in beginning my journey in hopes that maybe it could inspire you wherever you are in yours. So, the first thing that I did when I decided to immerse myself in a path of self love, when I truly accepted that I was not practicing self love and I wanted to change that, the first thing that I really did was I decided to dive deep into my spiritual practice. And I did a spiritual immersion. And for me, that spiritual practice was through yoga. And yoga is I couldn't describe it as anything other than spiritual. I mean, it is by far yoga changed my life, and the lessons that I've learned through my practice and the things that I learned in the process of that practice and the things that I still learn today, honestly, um, it's priceless. So that's the first step that I took, was immersing myself into my spiritual practice. The next step that I decided to take, creating a morning and evening routine. I was in a bit of a funk at the time. I was not even in a bit of a funk. I was at literally the lowest I have ever been in my life. And so I had no sense of structure, routine, ritual, or anything like that. And once I actually, when I say spiritual immersion, I actually traveled all the way to Greece, and I attended a 30-day yoga teacher training, and I lived there for a month, and I decided to really take the experience and just soak it all in. And I coined it my self-love tour. So like I went a little hard. I'm not saying to go this hard, but just to put it into context, before I did that, though, I was very depressed, and I didn't have a routine, I didn't have a ritual, and I was just allowing myself to go through the motions of life. So after attending a 30-day retreat, I had a routine and ritual, and when I came back home, I decided to stick with it and create my own, personalize it to my own lifestyle. And honestly, it's changed the trajectory of my productivity, of my goals, and so much more. So creating a morning and evening routine are definitely very helpful in in your path to self-love. It's honestly having that structure day to day. It can do so much because the first few hours of your morning are really what they paint and they pave the rest of your day. So, the third thing I began to do on my journey of self love was creating more healthy boundaries with myself and other people. So, this was definitely and is definitely one of the most difficult steps, and it's one that I still struggle with today, mostly with myself more so than with other people. Establishing healthy boundaries with yourself is it's self-discipline, and it's tough. Whoever said that self-discipline is just something that you can just like mantra your way into, they were lying. They're liars. They're fibber faces. It's not true. Like setting boundaries with other people really starts with yourself, because you have to be real and with yourself and sit down, assess where the boundary needs to be established, or you know and why it needs to be established. And a lot of that starts with it obviously, if it's a boundary, it's something that it makes you feel in a way that's undesirable to you. In essence, healthy boundaries, it's difficult, it's not easy. This is a whole episode within itself, which I probably will be creating in the near future. But creating healthy boundaries with myself and other people, once I began to do that, I honestly began to feel my confidence started to increase. I had more pride. I was more proud. I was proud of my ability to do that, to stand up for myself. Because oftentimes that's what it comes down to when we have a hard time establishing boundaries. It's not necessarily that, and it can be that the other person is intimidating, but oftentimes we just have a hard time expressing ourselves in in the way that we hope to. Well, and if that's not the case for you, this is for me. So once I began to establish these boundaries, I just became more confident, and creating boundaries from there only became easier. So it's almost like riding a bike. Like naturally, I still struggle with communication sometimes, actually communicating myself in the way that I'd like. But as far as establishing the boundary, it's definitely a lot easier for me to do now than it was in the beginning of my journey. So, and the fourth thing that I'm going to be sharing with you that I did to begin my self love journey was I began to create a self love ecosystem. And I, in essence, began to create the space around myself that I wanted to experience. And instead of waiting for other people to shower me with the love that I was hoping for, I just began to pour all of that into myself. My favorite example of this is flowers. And if you follow me on Poetic Touch, I'm sorry, but honestly, it's my truth. So I love flowers, and I've always loved flowers. And I found myself thinking, like, oh, I can't wait until someone gets me flowers, like, oh, that's so romantic. That's so sweet. And 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 so one day I decided to go to the flower district and get myself, I literally filled my apartment with flowers. And it honestly, it made me so happy. It changed my mood, it changed my home. It just made me feel better. And I was just so happy. I was so proud. Like, it may sound like a simple thing and a simple gesture, but there's something I love. I love having flowers, like the beauty of them, and uh, on some hippie shit, like the that they, from wherever they came from, that they were cut and they were chosen for me. Um, I just, yeah, I don't know. It's just something really beautiful about the essence of having flowers in your home. And so I always said that I wanted someone to get me flowers, and then I decided to do this one day. And from that moment forward, I decided that I was going to get myself flowers. So like every other week, I that's what I do. And eventually, I um, I began to meet people and like have people in my life give me flowers, and it became a thing where um, I don't know, it just happened more frequently, and even to the point where like my partner surprised me with flowers. And it's like, it's honestly, I don't really know how to describe the feeling in that. But it's amazing, for lack of, you know, my brain working. um, but yeah, it's just something about that. It's just it's an amazing experience. It's a beautiful experience, and like, so find your flowers, find whatever it is that you want that makes you feel loved or makes you feel amazing in whatever way, and do that for yourself, and you will be surprised in um and what leads from there, what happens from there. As we near the end of this episode, I'd like to leave you with an affirmation. I am a beautiful work in progress. Again, I'd like to thank you for listening to Self Love Over Everything. If you found any value in today's episode, I ask that you do leave a review from whatever platform you're listening. It will definitely help with the growth of this podcast. I also ask that you subscribe and stay tuned for next week's episode, where we discuss why self-love isn't selfish, it's necessary. This podcast is dedicated to women on the journey of self-love. Welcome. Your heart is safe here. It's my absolute honor to serve you. Thank you. I love you. Bye. Oops. All right. I got this. Let me hurry. Okay.